Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my hidden gems for Week 14 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Now, after the snap that occurred on Thursday Night Football, many of us began to realize that our stud fantasy prospects in our lineups began to disappear and vanish. Players to the likes of Keenan Allen, Elijah Mitchell, TJ Hawkinson, Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift, obviously from earlier this week, but of course, maybe even the likes of Darrell Henderson, once again missing a second consecutive week. Many of the stud players that are in our lineups in order to help us win in Week 14 and get us to our fantasy playoffs will no longer be available to us. So in order to go ahead and bring back our stud lineups, we're going to go ahead and go across the multiverse to different timelines, different planets, to different teams in order to collect these 6 hidden gems across the fantasy football universe. And to help accomplish that goal, of course, we're going to be using the help of Underdog Fantasy, a superhero in their own right, who will help us collect those 6 hidden gems. Of course, we'll talk about players that are currently being rostered in less than 40% of leagues, according to Yahoo. And a lot of these players currently started in less than 10% of leagues. Of course, we're talking about hidden gems, players who are typically available on your waiver wires, and even if they're not, perhaps even if they're on your roster, you may have to give them a second look and perhaps a second chance to start them this week in order to help you win in Week 14. Now, before we begin collecting these 6 hidden gems for Week 14, I want to thank you guys for supporting the channel. For those of you who have not yet already, be sure to subscribe and click the like button down below. Of course, we're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season, going to Week 18 in order to help you win a fantasy football championship, and even beyond that, in order to help you guys play in some fantasy playoff leagues for the NFL playoffs. And in order to do that, you can go ahead, travel to Underdog Fantasy and draft a team today. Again, if you use promo code Andrew, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. Again, an extremely generous offer for those of you who are interested in playing contests. Perhaps your season is almost over, or perhaps you just want to keep playing fantasy football even after the season is done because you can't get enough of it and you can't stop winning. Check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew today. There's a link down in the description for those of you who are interested. At the end of today's episode, we're going to be picking a couple pick'ems via Underdog Fantasy based on a couple of these hidden gems and some of the overall matchups that I like going into this week. All right, let's talk about our Week 14 hidden gems, beginning with the player that is currently on screen. It is Jeff Wilson Jr. He has currently already been a hidden gem earlier this season, and the main topic of interest whenever it comes to Jeff Wilson has to do with whether or not the starting running back of the San Francisco 49ers is healthy or not. And, we've seen it in years past. Whenever the starter is out, whether it had been, a Raheem Mostert or now Elijah Mitchell, Jeff Wilson Jr. has a great opportunity to come in and have true RB2 upside. Currently, he's only being started in 25% of leagues, and that's surprising to me, especially considering how much opportunity this team gives to their respective running backs as of late. In the last 3 games that Elijah Mitchell has started for the San Francisco 49ers, his total touches has been 27, 33, and 25. And you may be asking yourself, Andrew, is that going to immediately go in the direction of Jeff Wilson Jr.? I believe that to be the case. Even though he was questionable earlier this week, he had 2 full practices on Thursday and Friday, and he is expected to be the starter this week once again. Earlier this year against the Jacksonville Jaguars, he in fact was the starter, and in that game he had himself 20 total touches, and unfortunately Jimmy Garoppolo overthrew a wide open touchdown to him, which would have made his overall fantasy production 13 plus points in a half PPR scoring format. We know he can get it done through the air. We know he can get it done on the ground behind this incredible offensive line with George Kittle back, Kyle Juszczyk obviously some of the best lead blockers at the tight end and fullback positions. This offense is fully loaded and ready to beat down on a Cincinnati Bengal defense that, of course, has had some struggles stopping the run as of late. Another stat that I wanted to mention before we move on from Jeff Wilson Jr. as this week's Power Stone is that, yes, the hardest choices obviously require the strongest of wills, but in the 6 games that Jeff Wilson Jr. has had 15 or more touches between the last 2 seasons, 2020 and 2021, this man is averaging 19.82 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. I always mention it, opportunity leads to success, and opportunity will be knocking for Jeff Wilson Jr. this weekend as the Power Stone. Moving on to this week's Space Stone, we have Austin Hooper, tight end of the Cleveland Browns. Again, when we talk about the Space Stone, there obviously has to be a receiving option or a quarterback option because we expect their limits to be significantly higher than they typically are. And the main reason his overall floor of production will be amongst the top 12 at the tight end position, and he is skyrocketed in my rankings since Wednesday and Thursday, is mainly because Harrison Bryant and David Njoku, the 2 other tight ends that participate beside Austin Hooper in this offense, are both going to be out. And the thing that I wanted to first and foremost mention, in the last 3 weeks of production, prior to their bye week in week 13, of course, the Cleveland Browns certainly got, Austin Hooper involved. You go back a couple weeks ago, 4 catches, 25 and a touchdown for 10.5 fantasy points. The week after, 4 catches, 53 for 7.3 fantasy points. And against the Baltimore Ravens, unfortunately, was able to get himself 3 targets, but only 0 receptions for 0 fantasy points. So you may be wondering, Andrew, why would we trust a tight end who just had 0 points against the Baltimore Ravens, who will once again take on the Baltimore Ravens this week? Again, like I mentioned, without Harrison Bryant and David Njoku in this lineup, there's a lot of potential. And I'll tell you exactly why. The Cleveland Browns, amongst all teams in the National Football League, have targeted their tight ends the 11th most, 82 total times. On top of that, the Cleveland Browns currently have a 30% target share to their respective tight end position. If you go back to week 12, in which, of course, Austin Hooper didn't have a great game, had 0 total points, David Njoku had 11 fantasy points, and Harrison Bryant had 6.5. So that's 17.5 fantasy points that came from the tight end position against the Baltimore Ravens from the Cleveland Browns. So, of course, Austin Hooper should be able to get involved in this offense, get more utilization, and with opportunities, success will soon follow. Overall, I think Austin Hooper is a fantastic play, with Jarvis Landry, of course, being the primary receiving option, and the run stop of the Baltimore Ravens certainly going to push Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt to the limit. I think Austin Hooper is going to be a vital part of the Cleveland Browns' success this weekend, and that is why I believe he is the space zone. Moving on, we have Josh Reynolds. Again, another one of these players who's currently only rostered in 7% of leagues. And to be totally honest, I don't blame you guys. Josh Reynolds shouldn't be a wide receiver 3. And though he has been in that conversation for the last 2 weeks, he typically hasn't really been that in his career. Even with Jared Goff, going back to the days of the Los Angeles Rams, it hasn't been the case. But due to the current reality of the situation, this is why Josh Reynolds is the ether. Because the reality of the situation is, there is not going to be a Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift, TJ Hawkinson in this lineup against the Denver Broncos on Sunday. And with all 3 of those vital pieces out, where is Jared Goff going to go with the ball? Of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I anticipate him to get himself some utilization, but it seems like Josh Reynolds has been the security blanket. The rapport is already built in from so many years of playing together in Los Angeles that, of course, Jared Goff continues to go back to Josh Reynolds to find success. Against the Chicago Bears, on Thanksgiving Day, of course, in that morning game, Josh Reynolds, 3 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown, 14.5 fantasy points. This last week, of course, against the Minnesota Vikings, he had himself 4 catches, 69 yards on 7 total targets, 8.9 fantasy points. There's a lot of potential to be had here from Josh Reynolds. I believe with a backup tight end, backup running backs, and of course, your starting wide receivers out there, Jared Goff's going to have to go to the receiving position in order to ensure that his team can find success. And though they're coming off of their Super Bowl victory, beating the Minnesota Vikings last week, I think this team, of course, is more hungry to win now more than ever. They want to prove to people that it wasn't a fluke for them to win, and they want to continue to go ahead and do so. It's going to be tough against Denver, but either way, I think Josh Reynolds has himself a great opportunity for success. Moving on to this week's Soulstone, it is Jalen Guyton of the Los Angeles Chargers. The reason why I mentioned Jalen Guyton is because oftentimes the Soulstone requires a sacrifice, and this week the sacrifice will come in the form of Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is currently out for this upcoming Sunday's game against the New York Giants, where Jalen Guyton is probably going to fill in to his current position and probably be the next up in terms of wide receivers that are going to get targets besides Mike Williams and, of course, the utilization of Austin Eckler out of the backfield. Jalen Guyton steps up as that next receiving threat in this offense. And I know Josh Palmer's there, I know Jared Cook's there, but I think Jalen Guyton really does truly have an opportunity for success, mainly because when I look at where he pretty much lines up on a weekly basis, in the last 2 weeks of the 2021 fantasy football season, he has lined up in the slot position 21 times, while he's lined up out wide 39 times. Overall, he's getting himself opportunity in the slot position where typically Keenan Allen is dominating, and getting himself, outside wide receiver opportunity, in which, of course, last week, 4 catches on 4 targets, 90 receiving yards, and a touchdown for 16.9 total fantasy points against the Cincinnati Bengals secondary. Now, my anticipation is that, of course, Mike Williams is going to play on Sunday, which will make Jalen Guyton a little bit of a lesser play, but yet with that opportunity, he is going to be able to step up and have himself a great overall game. Justin Herbert has looked better than ever, continues to have these consecutive, consistent performances that we didn't see earlier this year, and of course, Jalen Guyton will be able to take advantage of it as this week's Soulstone. Moving on, we have our Time Stone, and last week's Time Stone was Adrian Peterson, and we talked about Father Time potentially catching up to Adrian Peterson, but he was able to run away from that for at least 1 week, got himself into the end zone, and now is inactive for the Seattle Seahawks, will not be playing this week. But Julio Jones is in a different conversation. Julio Jones is coming off of the injured reserve, and after an entire week of fully practicing, he has been activated. He's currently only being started in 15% of leagues, which makes me believe that, of course, there's a great opportunity for Julio Jones against this Jacksonville Jaguars secondary. But let me go ahead and tell you a couple stats. First and foremost, this season already, Julio Jones has only played 2 games in which he had 75+% of the offensive snaps. That was weeks 1 and 2. In those 2 contests, he was able to combine for 14 targets, 9 receptions, 157 yards, and no touchdowns. That's 20.2 fantasy points in a half PPR in 2 games. Okay, almost 10 points per game. We'll take that. Now, when we talk about this upcoming week's matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, of course, they've given up a bunch of points to opposing wide receivers. Let's talk about it. The Los Angeles Rams, all 3 of their primary wide receivers. Of course, Cooper Kupp had over 100 yards and a touchdown. Of course, Van Jefferson had himself a second consecutive week of a touchdown, and so did Odell Beckham Jr. The week prior to that, of course, Russell Gage, 6 catches, 62 and a touchdown. Brandon Ayuk, 7 catches, 85 and a touchdown. Michael Pittman, 5 catches, 71. The list goes on and on. The wide receivers against this Jacksonville secondary are always going to find success. And when I think about the wide receivers of the Tennessee Titans, I know Nick Westbrook, of course, is going to get himself, some opportunities here and there. But Julio Jones is going to be the primary option besides running the ball with Foreman on a downly basis. I think Julio Jones has himself a great opportunity to become the number 1 of this team and at least build more of a rapport with Ryan Tannehill, which they really weren't given much of an opportunity to do this offseason and or this regular season. It's going to be a little bit, choppy at times, and there's going to be a couple missed balls here and there. But all in all, I think Julio Jones has himself a great opportunity to take time by the throat and literally demand that we continue to start him because he is one of the best wide receivers in this generation. Moving on to our final hidden gem, we have Cole Beasley. As this week's Mind Stone, Cursed with Knowledge, I believe that Cole Beasley has an incredible opportunity to go ahead and put forth a great fantasy performance. And you may be wondering, Andrew, Cole Beasley hasn't done anything for the last 4 weeks, literally has done nothing. And that's exactly the point. When everyone is kind of moved past Cole Beasley and have begun to drop him on their fantasy rosters, perhaps this is the exact week to go ahead and pick him up. And the reason why I think so is because this is going to be a highly competitive matchup and relatively high scoring between these 2 teams. Of course, going down to Tampa Bay, you're going to have to put up 28 plus points in order to beat that, defense as a whole and be able to outscore a Tom Brady-led offense. That is just a fact of the matter. And luckily, we've seen some slot receivers find some success against this defense as well. I mean, Russell Gage, 11 catches on 12 targets for 130 this last week. Why not Cole Beasley? We know Cole Beasley is certainly capable of doing so. And if we go ahead and look back at 2020 and thus far 2021, when Cole Beasley is given 7 or more targets in a game, this man's averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game in his career over the last 2 seasons. Again, that's only 7 targets per game. That's all he needs. And he can get double-digit fantasy points. He's very capable of doing so. And I believe this is a week that the Buffalo Bills need to get back on track. And in order to do that, they have to continue to go back to what got them there, which is, of course, Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley dominating through the air as they were last season and hopefully will continue to do for the rest of the 2021 year. Cursed with Knowledge, I believe Cole Beasley is a fantastic hidden gem for this week. All right, now that we've covered our 6 hidden gems for week 14 of the 2021 fantasy football season, let's go ahead and let's travel to Underdog Fantasy. Besides them helping us, of course, find these hidden gems, let's go ahead and find some pick'ems through their pick'ems list in order to go ahead and perhaps 20 times our money this weekend. We'll go ahead and check that out. Be sure to go ahead and reach out to me via Twitter, via the Discord server, even comment down below. Let me know what your locks are for this week because I'm always interested to hear exactly what you guys think is going to happen. And for some of you, you've been extremely accurate and I'd love to see that. So go ahead and let me know what you guys believe are locks this week. Let's go ahead and check that out right now. So as you can see on screen, I've gone ahead and I've already collected 3 of our hidden gem members. Of course, Jeff Wilson Jr., Cole Beasley, and Josh Reynolds. I honestly do believe all 3 of them are very capable of surpassing their numbers. Of course, Cole Beasley and Josh Reynolds only have to surpass 46 total yards receiving, while Jeff Wilson only has to surpass 58 rushing yards, which again, last time he played, had himself 58 rushing yards on 19 carries. That's a 2.6 yard per carry average. He could very easily surpass that number this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll go ahead, throw a sprinkle on this, and if in fact we're able to accurately predict this, $10 turns into 60, as if you get 3 of these correct, you get 6 times your money. If you put 2 more in this, you can 20 times your overall money. But we'll go ahead and submit this for right now. And in order to just kind of cover all of my bases, I'm legitimately going to go ahead and I'm going to re-queue up that exact same prospect of players. So let's go to the bottom here and let's grab Cole Beasley once again, but instead we're going to go under. We're going to go ahead, we're going to grab Jeff Wilson under, and we're also going ahead and grabbing Josh Reynolds. And you may be wondering, Andrew, why the heck would you go against, what you believe? Well, mainly because I'm either fully correct or fully wrong all the time. And that's just how it is. So in order to cover my bases, I'm basically putting forth $20 in order to ensure 60. And if we have, a zigzag, one goes on, one goes off, so be it. I'm ready to go for it, and that's what I'm doing. Now, we've pretty much covered our hidden gems. Let's talk about players that really have great opportunity going into this week. All right, so as I went ahead and scrolled down this entire list, it truly is a giant list of overall players. I went ahead and found a list of pick'ems via wide receivers that I truly did like. DJ Moore, over 60 receiving yards. I'll take that against the Atlanta Falcons secondary, who have been giving up some of the most points to opposing wide receivers as of late. Jerry Jeudy taking on the Detroit Lions, of course, just needs to surpass 53 total yards. Again, the Detroit Lions are, one of the worst secondaries in the National Football League, one of the worst defenses as a whole. And in my opinion, of course, Jerry Jeudy will very easily be able to surpass this. Not only are they playing for themselves in order to pick up a victory, but of course, rest in peace, Demaryius Thomas. There will be a definite energy in that entire stadium this weekend. And of course, Jerry Jeudy as a wide receiver for this team should be able to step up and deliver on that. The next thing would be Jamar Chase. Of course, when everybody is kind of looking towards Jamar Chase and thinking like, he's pretty much washed at this point, here comes T. Higgins. I do think this is a week in which Jamar Chase can very easily turn it around. Last week, very easily, could have had himself a receiving touchdown in that contest if it wasn't for the dropped pass that went into the arms of Mike Davis. I think Jamar Chase certainly has the ability to surpass this number, and these three, something that I want to go ahead and lock in. Now, besides this kind of a pick'em slip, there are also pick'em slips that you can go ahead and do for the NBA, the NHL, for soccer. There are a bunch of pick'ems that you can go ahead and do. But what I also like to do is the rivals section for the NFL. Let's go ahead and check this out. All right, so as you can see to the right, we have a 5-leg rivals pick'ems for this week in order to try to 20 times our money on a $10 bid. So here is the scenario in which I've gone ahead and painted for us. DK Metcalf taking on Nico Collins. Nico Collins gets 40 extra yards. I truly do believe this is a week in which DK Metcalf dominates, and there's a reason why they're giving one Nico Collins so many yards. I think this is going to be a one-sided affair. I think DK Metcalf certainly surpasses that and wins that. Overall, let's go ahead and let's talk about Alvin Kamara taking on Ty Johnson. They're giving Ty Johnson 45 total rushing yards. I believe Alvin Kamara is certainly going to dominate there. He's been pretty much fully practicing all week long, and I understand people are worried about Taysom Hill. But when you have a running threat like Alvin Kamara in the backfield against the New York Jets, of course, it's going to be a one-sided affair. On top of the fact that, of course, Ty Johnson is going to have to produce on the ground against the New Orleans Saints, one of the best run-stopping defenses in the National Football League. I don't think Ty Johnson's able to surpass the overall number of Alvin Kamara, even with 45 extra yards. Moving on to Jerry Jeudy, he's only being given a 4-yard disadvantage against Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think that's very easily Jerry Jeudy's to win. I'll take Stephon Diggs, even though, of course, we have Chris Godwin with a 5-yard advantage. I think Stephon Diggs has an easier matchup against that secondary in comparison. And, of course, George Kittle taking on CJ Uzomah. I'm pretty much at a disadvantage in every single one of these picks, but there's a reason why there is a disadvantage in order to even it out. But I truly do believe that the stud players that I've selected are going to outproduce what is overall projected for them. So we're going to obviously try to 20 times our money, and that is pretty much what we're going to do. Now that we've gone ahead, made some pick'ems, go ahead, check this out. Use promo code Andrew today. If you go ahead and sign up using promo code Andrew, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. An extremely generous offer. Go ahead, let me know. Tweet it at me, message me. Let me know what your locks are for this week, whether it is the NBA, the NHL, the NFL for tomorrow's slate of games, Sunday night game, Monday game. You can go ahead and pick up any sort of players that you want. Root for them, even if they're not on your regular fantasy team. This gives you another great opportunity to enjoy fantasy football, regardless of what you have on your own respective team in your redraft leagues, dynasty, etc. All right, now that we've covered this, we'll go ahead and transition back to our hidden gems and snap our lineups back to its successful form. I want to thank all of you for watching. Again, these are our hidden gems for week 14 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Austin Hooper, Cole Beasley, Julio Jones, Jalen Guyton, Jeff Wilson Jr., and Josh Reynolds. Do not forget, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Kickoff with Kirikov will be live streaming with updated rankings. And until next time, guys, I'll see you. Peace.